Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
In Season 5, we have now reached episode 12, Dead is Dead. This is, of course, a Ben episode.
And we have our first of two segments this week with Patrick Fischler, who played Phil, the lovable, hateable, very hateable Phil on Lost. He's fun.
Sadly, he does not appear in this episode, but Patrick will still give us lots of great stories anyway.
Let's get started.
So before we jump into our hot takes about Dead is Dead, I have a bit of a mea culpa. I made a joke last week about what in the world happens to people when they go into the temple to be healed, and is what happens to Ben the same thing that happens to Sayid? And some of you very helpfully pointed out, I want to read this comment from Maddie on our YouTube page, but we got this in a few different versions. She says, what happens to Sayid in season 6 is not the same as what happened to young Ben. Ben is brought to the temple water or pool that has healing powers because of Jacob. But when they bring Sayid there, Jacob is already dead. The water had turned dirty and lost its healing power, as shown by Dogen's hand wound not healing when he dips in the water. They try it anyway, but fail to save Sayid. This is super helpful. I had forgotten about this. Thank you. And Maddie also adds that I thought young Ben's loss of innocence meant that anyone who's been saved by the temple is automatically a follower of Jacob. They're turned into a believer there, or there's some sort of like debt that they owe to Jacob or the island. I think that makes as much sense as anything.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Sammy, what is your hot take about Dead is Dead?
So, I have a question about what's going on with the barracks. I started thinking about this a few weeks ago when Sun and Lapidus are going in there. So the barracks have been, not lived in for 3 years, right? I mean, it was 2004 when the whole Kimi incident happened and, our folks abandoned them, the last ones who were there. 3 years later in 2007, they look like they've been totally trashed. They look like they've been abandoned for decades. Like, I just don't understand why the barracks are so fucking messed up. I mean, it's like bookshelves are thrown down and everything is in disarray. Like, it doesn't just look like people stopped living there for 3 years. It looks like someone trashed the place, which is very confusing to me.
Well, I noticed in Ben's cabin, which is where they are, I mean, the last time they were in there was literally when Martin Kimi killed Alex, right? And this is a note that I got from Lostpedia. I can't take credit for this, but the kitchen table is still set out with the board game that Sawyer and Hurley were playing, and like their plates are still out from whatever snack they were having. And like in that sequence, everybody was like barricaded in these cabins, right? So they were like throwing bookshelves on sideways and pushing stuff in front of the windows and stuff. Like they weren't trashing them, but they were throwing interior decor to the winds in an effort to like protect themselves. So. And there was that whole gun battle.
Yeah, but it wasn't just Ben's cabin. I mean, like at the dock, like light poles were falling over at the docks, and doors were like hanging barely off of their hinges, and other buildings. Like, I don't know. It looked like an earthquake had struck, or maybe a tornado or something.
Yeah,
I didn't think you got either of those things on the island, but it's not a major point. Like, I get the effect they were going for. I just thought, really, after 3 years, this is what the barracks look like now. Like, you might have overdone it just a little bit. That's all. I'm just saying.
Fair enough.
Rosie, what's your hot take about Dead is Dead?
So when Ben, in one of the many flashbacks in this episode, when Ben, I think, is sent to kill Rousseau, and he decides instead to take Alex and spare Rousseau, young Ethan is there with him again. And I was like, how many times are we going to see young Ethan? Like at this point, they're like, this is a name. This is an other name that the audience knows. Let's sprinkle Ethan in here just for dramatic effect. And I was like, okay, guys.
What is this? It's the second time? Because the other time was just when he was born, right?
Yeah. But they love to bring Ethan back, I think, for just a little dramatic effect.
Well, that's true. They bring Ethan back, not just young Ethan, but a bunch of times. Like earlier,
Ethan we
were time flashing this season, and Ethan shows up. Is about to shoot Locke in the after he falls off the airplane. No, I agreed. Actually, the one that I thought was even funnier, and I liked it. I'm not complaining about it, but for the second time this season, we get a surprise reveal that a character is actually young Charles Widmore. we got surprised this teenage punk is young Charles Widmore. Then we got surprised this good-looking dude with long hair on horseback is slightly older young Charles Widmore.
Yeah,
get it. Yeah. So now that we've done a couple of like silly little complaints, season 5 of Lost is tell me this is not the best season of Lost. Like, oh my God, another kick-ass episode after like 6 straight weeks of them, right?
No disagreements from me.
Oh my God, this show is just on a run. I mean, this episode, like we've been saying this every week, this is a killer episode of TV.
Oh, it's stunning in so many ways, particularly everything that Michael Emerson does and everything that Terry O'Quinn does.
I will say, just as long as we're appreciating Michael Emerson here, we should note he did win an Emmy for this episode, which is incredibly well deserved. I mean, I frankly think his delivery of the last line, which I can't replicate, but when he says, "It let me live," like I think that line was deserving of an Emmy all on its own. 4 words that just like knocked me out cold.
Yeah.
After that sequence. But yeah, everything between him and Terry, like I just kept copy and pasting their dialogue out of the Lostpedia transcript into my notes because it was just so riveting. We talked to Emerson a couple years ago and he said much more eloquently than I will now, but he basically just said every moment between these two guys is just so loaded with, life and death stakes and meaning and, incredible existentialism. And you get that like with every interaction with them this week. And it's just so much fun to watch.
Yeah. And not just that. I mean, both are trying to size one another up constantly, right? Because I think Ben seems to know that Locke is not the same man that he killed a couple of days ago. And I think he's trying to figure out what's up with that. And he says as much to Sun, right? Like people can't come back from the dead. And of course, one of the trademarks of Ben Linus is that we never quite know when he's expressing his true beliefs and when he is not. But I do think in that scene he is. And he's
Agreed.
Trying to figure out who in the hell this is or how this is possible. And John/not John is trying to figure out what Ben is up to. And
well, I actually am going to slightly disagree with that. I'll start by agreeing. I think you're right that Ben is being totally straightforward with Sun there. That this is, and I think he's doing it probably because he thinks that honesty is going to be the best way to get Sun on his team as an ally against this scary new Locke figure. We see him start to do it with Caesar, and that doesn't work out so well. And now I think he's trying to make Sun his new ally here in case they need to take action against the dude. So I think he's being honest. And I mean, I also think it's remarkable in that moment how the episode just like actually lays out for us that this is not Locke. I mean, we're not going to get that reveal for 4 or 5 more weeks, but like again and again, you watch this episode knowing what happens, and especially in that moment, I think it's hitting you over the head with this is not Locke. This is a new dude. But on the 10-dimensional chess, I actually think that Locke, the Man in Black, is just running circles around him the whole time. I mean, Ben thinks that he's playing a game with this guy who's on his level, but really, he's been the master manipulator up till now. But he's met the master manipulator, because from the we see Ben try. I mean, we see the moment that he realizes that Locke is seemingly still alive. Within 5 seconds, it's, oh my God, I knew this would happen. I knew you. And it's so obvious what he's trying to do there. And Locke just sees right through that and calls him on it almost immediately. And I think that what Man in Black is doing here, he's just from the first moment thinking, what can I use against this guy to get him to be my weapon, to be my loophole to kill Jacob. And he identifies very, very quickly that that it's Alex's death, that it's Ben feeling like he needs to be judged for that, and Ben just walks into his trap every step of the way. And by the end of it, especially after that scene with Alex, he'll do whatever this guy wants. I think it's a masterclass in manipulation by the Man in Black.
That's a good corrective. And I also think the Man in Black is enjoying it. He's a little bit superior and a little bit self-satisfied in all those conversations with Ben because he, to your point, he knows that he is light years ahead of this guy.
I see that too. He keeps getting these, I mean, even outside the dialogue, I think he keeps getting these little smug smiles forming on his face.
He's enjoying making Ben dance and watching it.
I mean, I just, like I said, I wrote down a bunch of bits of dialogue, and then One of my favorites was Locke asks him,
"So whose idea was it to move into these houses?"
Excuse me?
Well, your people were living in the jungle, and then after you murdered the Dharma folk, you relocated here. I just wondered if it was your idea.
Do you disapprove, John?
It just doesn't seem like something the island would want.
You don't have the first idea what this island wants.
Are you sure about that?
He's teasing him.
Yeah, totally.
Locke knows he's teasing him, and he's also, I think, making fun of that idea about knowing that it's the man in black. Like, he thinks the idea of what the island wants is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Like, he's making fun of Jacob here, in addition to running circles around Ben. I just think it's crazy.
That's a really, really good point. And that, I do want to jump to the very beginning of this episode in the scene where we see, dashing young Charles Widmore on horseback. Richard tells Widmore at that time that Jacob wanted Ben saved and that the island chooses who the island chooses. And that's interesting to me because that suggests that the island chose Ben to be saved, but it seems like Ben has this whole sort of inferiority complex around the idea that the island didn't choose him, or he's never met Jacob. He's never spoken to Jacob. Locke received this miracle and he didn't, right? And that was like the whole plot of season 3.
Yes.
Do you think that there's, truth to what Richard says there, that the island or Jacob or something wanted Ben saved? Or is that just, do you think Widmore is here as Ben would become later, is sort of the figurehead, but doesn't have that line to Jacob like Richard does?
I mean, I think it's the latter. Frankly, I thought Richard was bullshitting when he said that in order to give Charles what he needed to hear. Like, Richard came out into the jungle last week to meet Kate and Sawyer, and he seems to have made this decision on his own, as best as we can tell. Like, I think that nobody can question Richard because nobody else is talking to Jacob, maybe ever. I mean, he might be the only one. Maybe Widmore has met him, but I got the sense last week when, somebody commented to Richard, I think it was one of his, one of the minions who joined him at the handoff scene, was like, well, Widmore is going to be mad, or, sort of how's Charles going to react? And Richard sort of brushed to the side and like, I'll handle Charles. Like, don't worry about it. Like, my interpretation is that, especially seeing Richard later on sitting there quietly watching Ben and Widmore, have their argument about Alex, like, not interfering. My interpretation is Richard, is perhaps fed up with Widmore already, or at least getting fed up with him and eager for new leadership. Like, I'm sure that Ben doesn't ultimately take the throne without Richard helping him. And we get the sense in that scene with Richard coming to get Ben, from when he's pushing Alex on the swing set. Oh, he's at the dock. You don't have to see him off. Like, Richard seemed very firmly in Ben's camp there. So that's my interpretation, that this is Richard acting of his own machinations and thinking he, potentially sees Ben as an important player or a leader in the future. Maybe Jacob told him that. I don't know, but I think it's just Richard.
That makes sense.
It's interesting because later on in the brig, we see Richard go to Locke privately in season 3 and say, "Hey, we're having some problems with our leadership here, and people are looking to you for inspiration." Like, I don't know. Again, maybe he's taking direction from Richard, but I kind of prefer to think that, Richard is making these decisions on his own, and Jacob doesn't really give that much of a shit who's nominally in charge of the group.
Just doing a little sort of succession planning to make sure that things are always like somewhat stable. Huh, that's interesting.
I don't know. I'm kind of winging it with this, but it's making sense as I hear myself say it.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And we've always figured that Richard is sort of separate from these, petty squabbles. They're not petty, they're not petty squabbles, but he sort of sees himself as outside them.
Well, they are kind of petty. The leadership of the others and what these folks are up to most of the time, like, I don't know, it seems like a lot of it isn't actually that connected to their sacred mission with the island or Jacob's, purpose. Like, Jacob is out looking for candidates, right? Right? Jacob is looking for a replacement. Yeah. And that's his main thing. And I don't know.
And if Ben never talks to Jacob, how is Ben helping with that? Yeah.
Right. And Ben doesn't even know about the heart of the island, as far as we know. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, when they were arguing, that's how I felt when they were arguing about Alex too, Widmore and Ben, do they kill her or do they not kill her? And yeah, I mean, there's interesting stuff happening in Ben's character there, which we should talk about, but, they're arguing, Widmore's like, oh, if Jacob wants her dead or if the island wants her dead, she'll end up dead. And there's this implication that, maybe that she had it coming to her all those years later. But I just interpreted that as, these are two giant assholes with big egos who are, doing their own thing and putting this girl's life in the middle of it. And I don't think that has anything to do with the island.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's how we see Ben treat Alex when she dies in The Shape of Things to Come. I mean, he's using her as in a bluff, basically. And he thinks he's outsmarted the other guy, but he hasn't. And it results in her death. And
there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, and and it's like he says it was all about protecting. He tells Widmore, unlike you, everything I do is going to be about protecting the island. And it's like, no, we know that really what he was doing there. He might have told himself he was protecting. He was protecting himself,
right?
Just like he's protecting himself here when he's why did he kill Locke? It wasn't because it was the best thing to get them back to the island. It was because he wanted to come back and be in charge himself. Like it's really, really transparent at this point who this guy is looking out for.
Yeah, which this might not be the most logical leap, but that makes me want to jump ahead to the end of the episode, to the final line that you referenced.
What happened?
It let me live.
When we reached that point, I was sort of like, that's your takeaway? It let me live? It's like... it's sort of a very selfish response to what could have been this, and in moments I think was this experience of regret and remorse and recognition of his own failure and wishing that he had done things differently and wanting to atone, and then he comes away from it and is just like, oh, thank God I'm still alive. And of course that wasn't really Alex, so like there are asterisks by all of this, but I was like, that is a good representation, I think, of like why Ben is not able to move on at the end. I mean, his first priority, even in that moment, is still, oh, thank God I'm still alive. Is that anything?
No, I think you're totally onto something. Gosh, I mean, I completely agree. I hadn't thought about that. I think what it makes me think, though, is that, I mean, the whole point of that scene from the Man in Black's perspective was to sort of sharpen Ben into this tool that he could use to kill Jacob, right? Because, Alex says, right, follow John Locke's every order, do whatever he says, and that's how you, make up for what you did for me, or that's the implication, right, to what you did to me, that's the implication. But, at the end of the day, when Ben goes to stab Jacob, he has all sorts of his own reasons for it, right? I mean, he gives Jacob a whole spiel about, how he was so, you neglected me, you never talked to me, you didn't give me the respect I deserved, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I mean, the Man in Black asked him to do it and put the knife in his hand, but what you just said made me think, gee, would Jacob have done that? Would Ben have done that anyway, if given the opportunity, even without this, Alex threatening him on pain of death, his dead daughter, excoriating him for what he did to her and telling him to follow John Locke? I mean, maybe that... I mean, I think part of what I took from your comment is maybe that didn't even resonate the way it should. Maybe to him the whole point was, I'm still alive, thinking, I can't believe I'm still alive. Maybe he would have done the thing for John Locke anyway. Maybe he didn't even need that. That's not what you were implying, but I think it's a related idea, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I was more thinking about, come on, Ben. You could have taken this all away, and you could have, decided it was time to atone for the things that you did. And I guess what Alex tells him is the way that you atone for this is by obeying John Locke. So maybe he gets part of the way there.
But that's interesting because it's not really about atonement, because John Locke doesn't care if he atones. I mean, the Man in Black doesn't want him penitent. He wants him angry in the end of the day.
Right.
Like, he wants him scared, scared to disobey his orders, and he wants him angry at Jacob. So I actually don't know that, I mean, he wanted to get him to that place of feeling guilt so that he could sharpen him as a weapon, but did he really? I don't think that was all set up for him to feel atonement or to feel repentance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that what Alex said to him would have been very different if that was the case. It's not like she was telling him to go do good deeds or protect the island or try to help people. It was, follow John Locke's every order or I'll come back and haunt you. I mean...
Well, yeah, and before they even reach, like, the chamber, before Ben falls through the floor and they're separated, that's when the moment of realization seems to come. I mean, he says...
So you were right, John. I did kill Alex. And now I have to answer for that.
I mean, honestly, now that you talk about it this way, it's sad. It seems like I think he was ready to start to try to be better in this moment. Like,
yeah, me
after
too.
he makes that speech, he's in a place where maybe with the right guidance or instruction, he could get there. But that's ultimately that's not what the Man in Black wants from him or for him.
Yeah, and I do want to recognize the flip side here, or a simpler explanation, which is just the possibility that, Ben thought he deserved to die or figured that would be the result and is just sort of like surprised that wasn't the outcome. But I do think there's something here to the idea that Ben's first priority is still himself, and kind of like not totally as a result, but kind of as a result. Now he's caught in the Man in Black's web.
Right, and by the way, and that the Tangled Web is the title of the iconic Giacchino track of one of this season's famous tracks. So that's a good one.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
By the way, the Giacchino was so good during the scene down with the smoke. Oh my God. Mm-hmm. I like your point about it. Let me live. That was his takeaway. That's really, really interesting to me.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
What do you think that? Do you think that he would have done it and gone to be judged if the Man in Black hadn't forced him to? Like, clearly it was on his mind. He brought it up. But do you really think that's what he was going to have gone over to the other island to do if he'd been left to his own devices, or would he have chickened out or not gone through with it?
That's not the only reason he went over to the other island, right? He knew that there were resources there. He thought maybe he could contact. I mean, there were all kinds of reasons to go over to the other island. I think when he went down into the basement of his house and summoned the monster, I think he did that pretty much on his own. And then he went outside and waited for it. And if it had shown up in that moment, I think that would have been that. But then you have John Locke sort of egging him on and saying, no, we need to go to the temple. We need to go, you need to go under the temple. And because all of this is facilitated by the Man in Black, I don't know, he just wanted to give Ben the experience of following John to this moment, or... Because none of that had to happen. The smoke monster could have just appeared there and then.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, but yeah, I think it's to your point of sharpening Ben and getting him used to following John. I think it makes sense to see all of that as related.
I like that, because I was wondering the same. Why didn't he just show up and do it?
Yeah.
Trying to get him into a pattern of following John's instructions. I like that. And talking about my point earlier about, Locke being a master manipulator here. Locke knows, like, immediately that Ben is already making new plans to kill him. Alex says that at the end. She says, I know you're already planning to kill him again. It's like he was so aware, like he knew everything that was going through Ben's mind. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of Ben making plans to kill people, and also harkening back to the pettiness of the Ben Widmore conflict, Ben was actually going to go and kill Penny. Like, he shot and intended to kill Desmond, and was actually going to go through with that. Like, 100% was going to keep that promise to Charles Widmore. And not that, like, I didn't believe it, but... it's just cruel, and it's just ruthless, and Penny has nothing to do with any of this.
But was he going to go through? I think he intended to go through with it, but obviously seeing Charlie, he hesitates and he starts to lower his gun. Mm-hmm. But even before that, it seems what I had forgotten was that he doesn't shoot her right away. He explains to her,
right,
why
and she
he's
gets a
going to kill
moment
her.
to say, like, I have no relationship with my father.
Right, to which he then responds, your father is a really terrible human being. It's like, one, look who's talking, Ben. But two,
Right.
to me, he seems like he still needs to try to justify this to himself, even before he sees the kid, which we should talk about. I think that he's still out there trying to will himself into, yes, this is really a justified thing to do. I ought to pull the trigger. I mean, he definitely hesitates when he sees the kid.
Well, yes, and that's ultimately what forces his hand, I think, in the other direction. That's not the right metaphor to use, but whatever. And I think the show is obviously drawing a parallel between that and his insistence on saving Alex.
Right. I think you're right. The comparison to Alex is definitely what's going on here. But I was trying to think about like where this part of Ben comes from that has this sympathy for, I guess I'm interpreting it as a sympathy for mothers as well, or mothers of young children, because not only does he not kill Alex, he also leaves Rousseau alone.
Right.
And not only does he not, want to shoot when he sees Charlie, but I'm interpreting it as he hesitates to shoot just with Penny being there and, her being Widmore's daughter as well. And I don't know, I guess I was trying to explain this, and I was thinking like maybe he has a sympathy for vulnerable mothers because, his own mother died in childbirth, and he knows that's why his dad treated him so badly all these years. Like, that's kind of the best I could come up with. I'm not sure it's a perfect explanation, but it's the only thing that came to mind.
Yeah. I think people just like kids. And I mean, I realize how simplistic that sounds, but
Occam's razor.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would agree that children are sort of innocent and blameless and deserve to be given a chance. Even Ben. Which is interesting because Ben was, there are people who gave Ben that chance. Although he doesn't know it.
Well, that's interesting. Maybe some part of that still stuck with him.
Yeah,
even if he doesn't
he's
remember
paying
the
it
details.
forward in a weird way.
Paying it forward by hesitating just long enough for Desmond to tackle him and beat him half to death.
Jeez Louise. I mean, I think that part of the reason I felt like he was actually going to do it is that part of the episode happens after Ben, shoots Caesar in the chest, totally in cold blood. And not that he has any kind of really meaningful relationship to Caesar, but it comes out of nowhere. It's like Caesar offers even a tiny bit of resistance, and Ben's like, okay, we can't have this guy around. It's just such a total disregard for this person's life. And that was, I think, the thread that was running through for me is Ben A is still very selfish, very power hungry. And B does seem to have, and it's easy to forget with Ben because he's so funny and there's part of him that is sort of lovable as a character and that make me want to believe that he has good motivations. But I don't know, man. I think he has little regard for human life.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's hard for me to disagree with that, especially knowing that the ultimate plot line of Ben this season is going towards him, killing someone in the finale. That's the big dramatic moment of the end of the season. So I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
And, he ordered Saeed to kill all those people, which we just spent many minutes talking about. Anyway.
You were saying before we started that you didn't think this episode had any levity in it. I disagree. I thought there were some funny lines. One of my favorites was when Locke says, "Well, Ben, I was hoping that you and I could talk about the elephant in the room." And Ben just completely deadpan, "I assume you're referring to the fact that I killed you." Just total deadpan. I was cracking up. Such a good line reading.
I mean, again, this is the whole thing with Ben Linus is the way Emerson plays the character is there's so much irony, there's so much deadpan that everything comes off as a little bit funny, even when it's really cruel. And
it's so true. It's so true.
It makes it so hard, I think, to really step back and dislike this character, except when he's doing something very obviously bad. And even then you're sort of well, but he had that funny line.
Well, how could we forget the best example of that this episode, which is after he shoots Caesar and everyone is staring holy shit.
This gentleman and I are taking a boat. Does anyone else have a problem with that?
I mean, that's hilarious. I was laughing so hard, and I've seen that scene so many times. It's so funny.
Yeah. I mean, what is it that makes him so funny? I think it's this is credit to the writers too, I'm sure, this very formal way of speaking that's always sort of buttoned up and complete sentences and like an expansive vocabulary, and he sounds very educated. Like, bringing that into this sort of weird, like, jungle environment, I think is inherently really funny. Obviously, like, he's impossible to rattle under most circumstances, and so he can deadpan even when, like, things are flying around the room or whatever. It's genius. It's brilliantly done, all of it.
I think you put you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. Agreed. And they I think they wrote it that way because they knew that that's what Emerson could handle it. Not that many actors could probably do that, but he could.
Yeah. I mean, if for some reason you're listening to The Hatch Season 5, Episode 12, and this is your first episode, go back and listen to our conversations with Michael Emerson from Seasons 2 and 4. I think he mentioned in Season 2 that he was only supposed to be on a handful of episodes, or he was initially only slated for, the Henry Gale plot line, and then it grew from there.
Dude, we're so lucky to have this guy. I mean, yeah, this is just such a great episode. I loved watching this. It's really intense. It's a hard episode to watch in some ways, especially the ending. But I mean, frankly, at the end, I was almost tearing up a little watching Ben. Watching those memories. Like, it's really, really emotional. Even amidst everything else, the craziness and the cruelty, it's very resonant. Like, it's like you were saying, you still want to, despite everything, you still somehow want to feel sympathy for the guy. Even as you're watching the evidence of the worst thing that he's ever done play out in front of his eyes, it's like you feel bad for him that he has to go through this.
Well, yeah, and the structure of the episode gives us so many opportunities to feel like Ben has good inside him, right? He does save Alex, and we find out that was against orders, And he saves Rousseau against orders, and we know and we want there to be good in there somewhere. Yeah.
And look, we keep playing that game right up until the end of the show. I mean, he kills Charles Widmore in like the second to last episode unprovoked just because he finally gets an opportunity to. We'll get to that. It's a real shame. Another Lostpedia note. This was the lowest rated episode of Lost. In terms of just viewers. Like, this episode had fewer viewers than any other episode they ever aired, and that is a real fucking shame. What were people thinking after the previous, 7 weeks? Like, where were they?
we're here now.
Yeah. We are here now. We are here now, and in fact, we have Patrick Fischler with us. As mentioned earlier, he played Phil, and...
Patrick was so much fun to talk to. This will be the first of 2 segments over 2 weeks with him. Let's play it.
We are here with Patrick Fischler, who of course played the much-loved, much-hated Phil on Lost in the 5th season, Phil from the Dharma Initiative. He joins us from Lake Arrowhead. Patrick, thank you very much for being with us on The Hatch.
Of course, it's a pleasure.
All right. Well, Patrick, we always like to start at the beginning. How did you get cast on Lost? How did you come to play Phil?
I actually knew Carlton from Nash Bridges, the Don Johnson show from the 90s, which was one of my first jobs, recurring jobs. And Carlton worked on that. I think he ran it. So I got an audition for Lost. I'd kind of not spoken to him in a long time, but I knew the show. I was a fan of the show. And at that point, it was very little known about Phil. So I auditioned, I got it, and had to head out to Hawaii about 3 days later.
I think I saw in the casting call for Phil that the character was described as thin, serious, and usually in a bad mood.
That is exactly accurate.
It turned out to be a pretty accurate description of the character, I think, too.
It really did, and it's occasionally how I feel.
Did you know anything about who this guy was going to? I mean, you said you'd watched Lost, right? I mean, so you were.
Yeah, we were pretty much fanatics, my wife and I. Yeah.
Interesting. So you were excited to get on the show, then, I would assume.
Oh, I mean, insanely excited. And I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and I think it's maybe been 5 times I've been cast on a show that I love, and this was one of those times. And my wife was pregnant. which is a whole thing. And so, it said recurring. We didn't know what it was going to be. It's not like they booked me for 10 episodes or whatever. I just went to do that episode. and I hardly came back. I mean, it was kind of challenging and also wonderful. But yes, I didn't know a lot about Phil. I knew that first episode. That's it.
Oh, wow. Well, so that first episode is LaFleur. You're part of this huge sequence that ends with the big reveal when the audience finds out that Sawyer has been living on the island in the 1970s for 3 years and is head of the security force at the Dharma Initiative. And it's such a great twist. Do you remember what filming that sequence was like?
Gosh, it was so funny because I was actually on the plane. Kevin Rankin is in that episode. He was on Friday Night Lights. He played Herc in the wheelchair. Do you guys remember that character that was friends with Jason Street? Kevin's now on, Claws. Anyways, Kevin had this little part at the beginning. He was the other guy with me.
He was the guy who was dancing with the woman and they had the pot brownies and stuff. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I was a Friday Night Lights fanatic. And so I got on the plane and Kevin was on the plane and I was like, holy shit. And I called my wife before we took off and I was like, oh my God, Herc's on the plane. I bet you he's going to do Lost. So I turned around and I was like, are you going to do Lost? And then we just launched. Yeah, and the answer was yes. And so it was kind of surreal because at that point, I think I'd gotten the script, but when I auditioned, I hadn't. So I didn't know what this was. I knew, I didn't even know it was Dharma. In the sides, it didn't say it was the Dharma Initiative. So they're so not open with what's happening if you're just auditioning. But I think by the time I got on the plane, I saw a script. So I knew what was coming in that episode. And shooting it was kind of a dream. I mean, Josh he's just the greatest dude. And I was so excited because to me it was like, oh, wait, this is Sawyer. And then I got to put on the Dharma outfit. And I was like, this is so crazy. This business is so weird. I'm like, I'm a fanatic of this. And now I'm in a Dharma. Now, I mean, it was just, and I'm in Hawaii and it was a lot of night shoots. It was a very wonderfully odd experience.
Yeah, one thing that's so cool to hear that as a fan is that, just watching the show, when they get to the Dharma Initiative and they go back to the 70s, it's like, oh shit, they're back in time with the Dharma Initiative that we've wanted to see for so long. So it's cool to me to know that was kind of your reaction, as an actor going into it as well, because you didn't know you were going to be in the 1970s with the Dharma Initiative either.
No idea. I mean, I thought I was a dude with another guy I had no idea what was happening when I auditioned. I had the breakdown, which didn't say anything except bad mood and skinny or whatever. And so I was so excited. I mean, it was I wish that I had taken my costume. I wish I had just conveniently had it in my suitcase when I left because it was super cool to have that on. I mean, I'd be in so much trouble, but still.
I think you could have gotten away with it. We've heard stories about people taking shit from the set, and I don't think anyone came to get him.
Yeah, I think I was, by that point, by the end of it when I could have taken it, I just had to get home to my baby being born. So I was focused on that. But yeah, you're probably right.
Was your baby named after a Lost character by any chance?
God, no. Okay. No.
Just checking.
I feel like I would maybe take it too far. Maybe a little bit. But yeah, no.
At what point did you realize that you were going to be on a while? I mean, I think I read, were you just booked for one episode and then it just was one by one?
You guys, it often happens in our business, but it really happens with shows that don't want to reveal too much. I thought I was going for one, and I remember when I was wrapping that episode, so I had like a day left, my agent called and was like, you're in the next one. I'm like, oh. So I have to stay? And they're like, yeah, you have to stay. I'm like, oh, shit, okay. And that kept happening the whole time. Except I had some reasons that they let me come back. But for the most part, no one told me anything. I mean, I really had no idea. Even when, I'm trying to think, Carlton and Damon came to set once, halfway through or something. And I asked them, I was like, what? And they were like, they wouldn't say a thing about what was going to happen. So I just kept getting put into the next one. And then I was like, oh shit. All right. Okay. you know?
Yeah. Well, this is skipping ahead a little bit as I was rewatching your scenes, and I was thinking, obviously you get killed at the end, and we'll ask you about that in a few minutes. But I think, the other Dharma characters who are there, like Pierre Chang, Dr. Chang, that he survives and makes some more videos, and Radzinski, the crazy one, that he sticks around because he's going to be in the hatch later with pushing the button. But it's like with Phil, I was kind of thinking like, okay, this is a character they could afford to kill off at the end, at least, because he's not going to. There's no sign already that Phil's in the future somewhere. You don't know that he survives.
Exactly. I think that they need to kill people, and I was a perfect person to kill, and they surely set it up that the audience would be like, yeah, kill that asshole, please.
In your very first scene, the guy from Friday Night Lights is like dancing and having a good time, and he's got the brownies, and you use the word hootenanny in your first line. Like, what's this hootenanny going on here?
I can't believe you just brought that up. I forgot. I haven't thought about that in 11 years. That's insane. Yes, and I remember feeling like that is such a specific word choice, but I think it worked for Phil.
So, obviously, knowing that it's been 11 years, what is your assessment of Phil? Do you think he was always such a jerk, or did you make up a backstory for him at all?
No, he's just he was an asshole. I mean, it's pretty easy to play. I gotta tell you guys, I've played so many assholes or jerks or whatever, and I mean, honestly, it's so much fun. I have no problem with it. I remember when Phil hits Juliet.
Yeah,
And Eric, who played Radzinski, was like, "You're going to be the most hated character." He was like, he was super serious about it too. And I said, "Okay." I mean, I just have no problem because it's not me. I'm a pretty nice guy, and so I was like, "Fine, let the audience hate me. This is awesome," But I remember that was a big deal, hitting her, and honestly, there wasn't a lot to get into his head because, in fairness, I wasn't given a lot, and so it kept coming, meaning I wasn't told what was coming, and I just kind of had to make it up as I went, And I'm not a huge backstory guy unless I have a kind of A to Z arc that I know is coming, and I didn't have that. So I kind of just was like, all right, listen, this guy's a bitter jerk who hates his job and wants to, be somewhere else.
Who among us?
I wonder why you would have joined the Dharma Initiative. Maybe you just needed the job.
I think so, honestly. I think he was a guy who was like, I'll give this a try. And then after a week was like, oh, shit.
Two things. One, when you hit Juliet, and that's such a great scene. It's a horrible scene, but it's a great scene. I noticed that Eric playing Radzinski, who's up to this point, seems like the most extreme, version of all the Dharma guys. Like, he's willing to do anything. Even he kind of recoils a little when you hit Juliet.
I think that was kind of the point. I think they were like, knew I was going to die, and they were like, let's make an audience just pray for this dude's death. And I think they really took it as far as they could. And I think that was the point, is Radzinski was kind of the jerk up till then, And so to make me even a bigger jerk, have him sort of go like, oh, whoa,
How did you feel about being impaled?
That was awesome. Come on, you guys, better than being an asshole is also having a great death. I mean, a great death is just fantastic. So I remember getting that script and being like, this is awesome. I mean, come on. It's like The Omen. I mean, it's like, if you ever saw that movie, you never saw The Omen?
No, sorry.
Guys, The Omen's really good. It's a 1970s classic horror movie.
Neither of us.
I won't tell you.
Neither of us was around in the 1970s. I'm sorry to tell you.
Well, I know it is. I think I was like 4 when it came out, but I've seen it since. It's awesome. Watch it. It's really good.
Okay.
Anyways, there's a death like that, so I thought of that.
Oh, geez. So somebody you would have worked a lot with would have been Josh Holloway, who, of course, played Sawyer. These are just super, super different characters. What was it like to play those two people off each other?
It was a total blast. He's a really great dude, a really great guy. And I got to tell you, everybody is. I had a wonderful experience because I got to hang out because Evangeline I was with a lot. But Josh is he's a great scene partner. He's a nice guy. He's funny. He's smart. He was just awesome to hang with, but really great to act with. He's fully right there. It was just a blast. If I could have picked anyone before I went, I was like, I hope it's Sawyer. And then I was like, oh shit, it's all Sawyer.
Yeah, the one, you say that there wasn't much, sort of backstory or depth given to your character, but the one moment that I thought, was a little bit maybe revealing past just, Phil is an asshole, was when you discovered that LaFleur Sawyer, had been the one that took the kid out of the camp. You found that security video of him, and rather than go to turn him in, you actually went and gave him a chance to, explain it, and you said something to the effect of, I've worked for you for 3 years. I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt. Turns out to be your downfall because he knocks you out and ties you up and puts you in a closet. But I did think that it showed like, okay, at least he's got some loyalty to Sawyer here after all this.
I think that was sort of maybe came upon my chemistry with Josh. Something about our working together that made that make sense. Because I think even though Phil's a jerk, I think he liked LaFleur. I think he liked Sawyer. So I think it opened up that moment. God, I forgot about that. It's so funny. I haven't seen it since I watched it 11 years ago. So you're mentioning things that I'm like, oh, right. Oh, my God. Yeah, I forgot that. I remember being tied up in the closet.
Well, sure. I mean, I had forgotten that, too, until I went back to rewatch it. And I was even kind of surprised because in my mind, like, oh, Phil is terrible. Everything Phil does is terrible. So when I saw you go and give him that chance, like, oh, okay, like that's kind of surprisingly nice. Like, I'm glad he did that.
Yeah. Is it after I hit Juliet that I go do that?
No, it's before. It's after he ties you up and puts you in the closet. That's when you hit Juliet.
Well, that's when all bets are off, I think. After that happened, I think Phil's like, all right, I was mad before, and now I'm really mad.
It's fun.
Post-closet.
What was it like? I mean, we talked about the impaling, but just that whole sequence. That sequence at the end is one of my favorite sequences in all of Lost, the incident. Can you just talk about what that was like to film? Because it's chaotic and it's crazy on screen.
You guys, it was super intense. And I will say, and I will always say this, I cannot thank them all enough because I had to get home for my baby's birth. And about months before when I knew I was in the finale, and it's like a 2-part finale.
Yeah.
And I remember I had to go talk to them and I was like, you guys, I have to leave. My daughter's due on April 1st. And we were shooting to like April 15th. And they were like, oh, I don't know. And I just said, honestly, I can't be in the episodes then because I love this show, but obviously my choice is I have to be there for my daughter. And they worked the schedule and that scene is huge. And it required so much of so many people. And they really bent over backwards. And I'll never forget that. Because I was like, I have to be back a week before, just in case it's early or something. And they did. And that scene was unbelievable out there. I mean, the stunts, everything. It was no joke. I forgot who directed that episode. Was it?
It must have been Jack Bender.
Steven? Oh, it was Jack.
It's
yes,
gotta have
of
been
course.
Jack. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a spectacular episode. And up to that point, I'd never seen anything like it, It was pretty great.
No, I mean, and everyone is shooting at everyone else, and you've got every metallic item flying across, towards the hatch, and that Trent Tower falls on you, and oh my God, the van drives through. I really think it's the best sequence on the whole show. Like, that's my opinion as a fan. So I'm jealous of you that you got to be a part of that.
You know what? And what's amazing is it felt special there. And that often doesn't happen. Like, you could ask me about some other job I did. I'd be like, it was fine. I remember being there feeling like this is really unbelievable. It's pretty spectacular. It was great.
So normally one of the questions that I love to ask is when we talk with actors, is like, how did you think about this person as a person? How did you think about their backstory? What was going on in Phil's head? And I love that the answer to that is just, he's just an asshole. He just sucks.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be any deeper than that. And, maybe it doesn't because it's really effective.
I agree. And exactly the opposite of what Eric Lang had to say, who had this whole idea in his head about how, why it was that Stewart became as awful as he was to people. And Patrick Fischler is like, yeah, he sucked. He just sucked. Whatever works for each actor, because Patrick is wonderful in this show. I mean, Phil is...
Oh, absolutely.
He does the role perfectly. So if that's what worked for him, we'll have more from Patrick next week. We got one more segment from him, and after that, for the next 2 weeks, we've got Mark Pellegrino, who plays Jacob, and that is a wonderful conversation as well. Unfortunately, we're not going to have Mark in the season finale, where of course he appears for the first time, but that's because we're going to have Damon Lindelof back to talk about that episode in incredible detail. So yeah, it's a good excuse. It's a good excuse. We'll be doing Some Like It Hoth next week. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter. We're at The Hatch Podcast, Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast as well.
If you'd like to call and leave us a hot take, you can do so at 9546-DHARMA. U.S. phone number, so if you're out of the country, just add a 1 in front of that.
Try to keep it to a minute or less if you can, and that makes it easier for us to play. We also love ratings and reviews. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. Give us a couple of stars, maybe 5 of them, and leave a review if you can.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Raw.
And we will be back next week.
Namaste.